Attention all you New Yorkers. Excuse me, taxi.
Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
Welcome back to Full Court Press. I'm your host, Sean Spicer, here on WABC. Boy, do we have a treat for you. When we break down where we are in Iran, what this all means, where we think this is headed, no one better to give us the best analysis on this than General David Petraeus. General, good Sunday morning to you. Thank you for being with us.
Great to be with you. Thanks, Sean.
Okay, so let me just start with this. Do you think, how important was the blockade to changing the dynamic of where we stood with this conflict in Iran?
I think it was exceedingly important. We could not allow Iran to emerge from this war very weakened militarily. Our men and women in uniform have done a magnificent job in taking down the missile launchers and stockpiles and drones and leaders and headquarters, the air and ballistic missile defenses, the Navy's all sunk, whatever was left of the Air Force is gone, etc. So very militarily weakened, but strategically strengthened if they were allowed to retain control of the Strait of Hormuz, through which, of course, 20% of the world's crude and distillates flows on a given day, and 20% of the LNG as well. So, and also they were charging toll, reportedly around $2 million in Bitcoin, which if you have 130 ships a day going through, you can do the math and realize that that's an awful lot of hard currency for a country that will be desperate for all that it can get to rebuild after all the enormous damage to its military industrial complex. So this couldn't stand. It cannot be allowed. And so we then said, okay, it's all or nothing. You can't export either, because Iran was actually exporting 1 to 1.5 million barrels of crude and distillates a day. And their friends and others could appeal to them to get through as well. And what they've done is they say that they have put mines in the normal channel, and that pushes the ships up into their waters, the northern part of the Strait of Hormuz going out. And that allows them to then impose this toll on the ships that were doing that. Now, interestingly, on Friday, the foreign minister said that there will be free use of the strait, but then clarified that it has to go through their area, which seems to imply that they may still try to charge a toll. Meanwhile, the U.S. reportedly has put 2 ships through it and then back out in the regular channel. Presumably will do demining operations of various types of unmanned as well as manned vessels to confirm that it is clear. And you may then see actually the U.S. start to escort ships out, and that's when it'll get interesting. But the bottom line is that this puts the pressure on Iran that was lacking on this particular issue. And now you have pretty serious negotiations on the strait, and then also on the residual nuclear enriched material, 60%, which is 1 turn of the enrichment process below weapons grade, that reportedly is in containers either underneath the destroyed Esfahan nuclear facility in Iran, or perhaps one other location that is more recently discovered. And the president's quite insistent that there's not going to be sunset clauses as there were in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Agreement, the Obama administration nuclear deal, that they'll never be allowed to enrich. We'll see if Iran is willing to accept that. There's a lot of pushback against that. And then we'll see what it is that they're willing to accept with the strait. And I think the president has to be pretty hardline about this. It, again, would be unacceptable to allow Iran to turn the Strait of Hormuz into their private Panama Canal and then charge ships for going to and from.
So I want to get to the uranium in just a second. But for the person that's sitting out there right now, General Petraeus, and says, okay, you destroyed their Navy, you destroyed their Air Force. How did they, aside from dropping some mines to force people, like how do they have the ability to control that strait, right? In other words, what is it? Sure. Is it just that they give you a secret map and say, here's where you avoid? What is it that gives them the strength? Say that?
They have been hitting ships. So every few days, sometimes consecutive days, they have struck ships in the Gulf, not in the Strait necessarily, but in the Gulf. There have been some actually in and around the Strait as well. 8 crew members have been killed from these ships. Damage has been done to other vessels. And that undermines the confidence that is necessary for those who own the ships and own the cargo in them to send them into further harm's way by trying to go through the strait. They're not certain that the mines have all been identified and blown up. If there are those, again, sadly, Iran didn't keep a map of where they dropped them reportedly, if they did. But it's also just the vulnerability. All you have to do is hit something with a drone or a cruise missile or some other attack, small boats, even unmanned maritime boats. We didn't get every tiny ship that they have. And keep in mind that the strait is full of other ships as well. They're going back and forth. I've stood on the mountain overlooking the strait. It's a tip of Oman, and watched salvos of these vessels that are actually taking all of the illicit goods from that location over to Iran. So there's huge numbers of vessels moving around there. It's the big ones, obviously, that matter. And it's not about risk insurance. It's about confidence. I talked to the two largest energy company CEOs, and they said, we're not going to put our crews in harm's way, regardless of what the risk insurance is, even if someone underwrites it for us. We don't want to lose our sailors. So that's a pretty high bar to get over. We could try that. And then the challenge is if Iran breaks the ceasefire by attacking some of these ships, you're back into it. And they have to realize that. And obviously would have lots of contingency plans to try to defend against any of these potential attacks by Iran on ships that are moving through the traditional channel right in the center of the Strait of Hormuz. It's about a mile wide either way, coming in and going out, as opposed to up into Iranian waters to the north of that channel, which is then obviously controlled by Iran.
So there's two things that I want to follow up on that, General Petraeus. The first is this: for a lot of people watching this unfold, right? I apologize because I probably should have drilled down on this question more. If you're watching from afar, you hear the rhetoric from the administration that says we've destroyed all their capabilities, and then they go, wait a second, why did they have the capacity and the capability of harming, these commercial ships? Like, where is this coming from? So is this residual weaponry that they have access to? Is this proxies? Like, in my mind, I think, right. So the average person sits out there.
Proxies would be over on the other side.
Okay, right. But I think that the average American, right. So the average American who's sitting back and seeing this says the United States Navy's done all this brilliant stuff. And so why are these little guys, onesies, twosies, able to stop, dictate this degree of commercial shipping? I get your point. Like, if you own MSC or Maersk or whatever, you're like, listen, all you need to do is hit us once. You could take out our container ship. You could hurt a sailor. So we're not going through until we have a high degree of confidence. Totally makes sense. But I think for a lot of people on the highest, like on a 50,000 foot level, they're saying, why is the United States Navy not able to stop that threat?
Because it's a pretty challenging threat. I think we can probably stop the bulk of it. But even when we were dealing with the Houthis in Yemen, another proxy force of Iran, and attacking them for interdicting the lines of communication around the Bab el-Mandeb on the other side of the peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula, which then feeds up into the Suez Canal, it's difficult to get every single last item. And keep in mind that all they have to do is be successful every few days with, again, some residual drones, some residual small little craft full of explosives. There's any number of small items still left. Everything is not wiped out. There's even missiles left, and there are drones left. It's going to be very hard to rebuild the missiles, which is very good because that's the biggest threat to our partner Israel in particular, but and also to the Gulf states. But there are still drones. They can still cause damage. And again, if they get lucky and they ignite something, then you have a ship burning. And there have been a couple incidents like that. There was one far up in the northern part of the Gulf that actually burned. So again, there's never a situation in which you eliminate every single threat. The way you do that is through negotiations.
Right. And that gets me to my other point. This gets to the second piece that I want to ask you. Do we trust them? So when the foreign minister says, hey, we're going to, Okay,
don't
that's what
trust, verify. Remember Reagan said it. Don't trust,
right.
verify.
But this gets back to your point though. Like if I'm the, whether it's the ship driver himself or the owner of Maersk or whatever, I get a phone call that says, "Hey, guess what? The foreign minister says you're good to go." Right? I get the trust but verify, but get back to that idea of risk for a second. The United States government says, "Hey, you saw the tweets or the statement from the foreign minister. What degree of confidence do you have as a company, a Maersk or an MSC to say, does that, you guys didn't know where you put the mines and now you think that you're going to just tell us we're good to go? Like, how does that that's where I would fall a little short in saying, I'm not sure I trust these guys.
Well, what they have said is that you have to go through the Iranian route, not through the normal route, which is what we're clearing. And again, you're going to trust, and I think you would. Yeah. Again, they don't want, especially if they're paying. What we don't know is whether Iran is going to charge a toll for going through its waters. These are 12 miles and so forth, which is what they had been doing. So again, we'll figure out, is there a toll? Is that acceptable for in the short term, or can the U.S. ensure that they can make it safely through the regular area? And I think that the latter is possible, especially during a ceasefire, but it obviously carries more risk. Again, it's always about the level of risk in this situation. There's never perfect confidence about anything. Heck, there's still pirates out there. There's still other, extreme weather. The maritime domain is full of challenges and risks, even beyond nation state activities or proxy activities. But it's about having these risks reduced sufficiently through mitigating measures. And the U.S. Navy, the naval component of Central Command, is a pretty formidable risk mitigant if they can get in and organize this at some point, assuming that Iran does not want to get back into it with the United States. They have an ability to ride this out for a period of time. They reportedly have somewhere around $30 to $40 billion of reserves. They have 150 million barrels floating around out in Asia that they can start delivering. Some of this is in the so-called ghost fleet that they have, that they operate. But at a certain point in time, economically and financially, even though they're an authoritarian regime that can weather this more easily than one that is a democracy facing elections in the fall, at a certain point, their economy implodes and they've got to get an agreement. And I think they are certainly at least seeing that possibility, which is what's driving them to the negotiating table. And with Pakistan, most importantly, facilitating this. And then we'll see if there can be an agreement that satisfies both sides, in particular the U.S., when it comes to the Strait and when it comes to the residual nuclear enriched material.
So, General Petraeus, you've been at the highest levels of this kind of stuff. Can you just take us inside for 1 second? When this, so the narrative, if you bear with me for a second, was Iran sort of controls the Strait, and then suddenly we hear about this blockade, which I think, frankly, was brilliant, right? How does that happen in terms of is it the decision at your level goes to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and then he briefs the Secretary of War, who then briefs the president? Do you go to the tank together? Do you say, Mr. President, we have some military options, and go over? Walk us through for a second the decision-making process that at your level would go to the president with options that he would consider.
Well, the way it works is the combatant commander, geographic combatant commander, in this case, U.S. Central Command, 4-star, happens, ironically, to be a Navy admiral for only the second time in the history. And of course, I was the Central Command commander from 2008, 2010 between Iraq and Afghanistan. You are given objectives. These are the national security objectives, in this case, the military objectives. And then you come back with options to achieve those objectives with associated risks and risk mitigation measures. In other words, if we try this, there's a possibility they could mine the Strait. They may target Gulf state infrastructure, all of these kinds of risks, some of which obviously materialized, a number of which. It depends on whether the commander goes up to Washington or not. In this case, he probably stayed at Central Command headquarters. They're actually running it from Tampa, Florida, MacDill Air Force Base, which is the main headquarters, not from the forward headquarters outside Doha, Qatar at Al Udeid Air Force Base, where there is a forward headquarters, but part of it is above ground, and this is a more challenging situation now than it was, frankly, when I was the commander. We didn't have to worry about drones then, and Iran didn't have the substantial missile threats that it has now. So it's on a secure video teleconference, probably a session between planners, then the chairman and the Central Command commander, the Secretary of Defense very quickly, now Secretary of War, and then ultimately you're going to have a National Security Council meeting with, again, the Central Command commander laying this stuff out, the chairman as a senior military advisor to the president offering his thoughts, Secretary of War, and others. Because, of course, there are economic components to this, financial components. There are other policy-making concerns, which is why you have around that table where you've sat, I'm sure, when you were in the White House, in the Situation Room, you have individuals representing a variety of the different departments of our government offering their views on this. Again, energy is obviously pretty important. What will the price of Brent?
So when you were CENTCOM commander, when you were CENTCOM commander, I don't mean to interrupt you, General. Is it that do you pregame this with the chairman and the SecDef or the SecWar now and say, hey guys, in this case it would be Admiral Cooper. Like, is he saying I think this is the smart move, or is he walking into that Situation Room or the tank, basically rolling the dice, hoping that the chairman and the SecWar are on the same page as him?
Well, you don't do it in the tank very often. If you go to Washington, you can do the tank virtually. Again, you don't have to. In a world of secure video teleconference, you don't really have to go up to Washington. I would periodically just to be in the Situation Room on really important decisions. But a lot of the decisions were just all done secure video telecoms. We could do them from Al Udeid Air Force Base in Qatar. I mean, the Qataris built that building for us with $100 million they gave us, and then we filled it full of $75 million more of communications, architecture, intelligence systems, command and control, and that enabled us to not only run the campaigns in that theater. Keep in mind, by the way, at that time, when I took command of CENTCOM, we had 250,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen, and another 250,000 contractors in comparison to the about 50,000 military they have out there right now. But 2 2.5 wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, and the pirate-infested waters off Somalia, among others. So that's a big enterprise. But when you're doing the big policy-making decisions, again, it's typically the president in the seat at the top of the table in the Situation Room, or perhaps with his style in this case, it might be a bit more in the actual Oval Office. But no, you have constant communication going back. The planners and the Joint Staff and the planners at Central Command are sending stuff back and forth constantly. They're providing it to the chairman and the secretary. Eventually, again, you have conversations with the secretary, chairman, CENTCOM, perhaps others. And then, of course, you're going to get into the whole national security policy-making apparatus, which culminates with an actual National Security Council meeting at which you have, again, the National Security Advisor on one side, then the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, Director of CIA, again, the various cabinet department secretaries relevant to the issue at hand. The other side, the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, Chairman, Combatant Commander, and others. And then NSC staffers and so forth in the back row. So that's how it works. And again, it's a pretty continuous process. And of course, CENTCOM and the commander himself can say, hey guys, do me an excursion on this. Tell me what could we do? And in this case, the blockade has actually been openly discussed, not just in policymaking circles, but in the sort of the think tank world. There have been a number of us who were saying that we ought to do, we should say to the Iranians, it's all or nothing. Either everybody gets to go through freely, as they did before, or no one goes through, including your oil tankers and your friends and family, if you will.
It was beautiful. General Petraeus, in the final 30 seconds we have, I have a theory that behind the scenes, the biggest unsung hero of getting us to where we are today is China. They are forcing the Iranians to do any of this. Do you agree or disagree with that theory?
tend to be cautious about this. China's in a tricky position. They're the biggest consumer of Iranian oil. They are supporting Iran in certain ways. We know that they have been providing intelligence, but they can't provide hardware or something like that, which the other side of the Gulf would see as very hostile to them. And keep in mind, they buy a lot more crude and LNG from the other side of the Gulf than they do from Iran. They probably want to see this come to an end, although it's not necessarily the case. They're not sad to see us use huge quantities of our most exquisite offensive munitions, particularly submarine, ship, and air-launched cruise missiles and these exquisite systems. And then the defensive missile interceptors, where we've used well over all of last year's production of Patriot interceptors in the first week or two. So again, they are not disappointed to see us having to pull assets from around the world, including some from the Indo-Pacific, to the Gulf region. But on the other hand, their Asia partners in particular, even more so than China, are really being hurt by the increase of the price of Brent crude, LNG, lack of fertilizers, even the lack of other elements required for chip making. Helium is required for that, comes out of the Gulf. There's a lot of second, third, and fourth order effects that are affecting the global economy, and the Asia partners of China and trading partners are the most affected. Europe to a degree, especially with jet fuel and some other categories. So I think it's a bit more complex than that. I do think they probably want to see the Gulf opened up. I'm not as convinced that they will be that eager to see the overall focus on the Gulf shift back to the focus on the biggest potential scenario in the world, the one we have to deter, which is something in the Indo-Pacific.
Okay. General David Petraeus, thank you for joining us and giving us this unbelievable insight today. I appreciate it. Have a great Sunday and a great rest of the week.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, sir.